Good evening, and thank you for joining us as we'll be starting in about 4 to 5 minutes.
Shit.
Mute mics until we begin. Thank you. Good evening, everyone, and thank you for joining us. It's about 5:30. I'm going to get this meeting started and introduce Assistant County Executive Officer Barney Malekian.
Gina, thank you very much, and good evening, everyone, and thank you for joining us tonight. This is the third of 6 community plan area meetings held virtually, which is, I think, none of us were planning on back in March when we were first discussing how to do this. Our purpose tonight is to bring you information on the Toro Canyon Summerland Community Plan Area, talk about the process for business licensing, for applicant selection, to review the permitting process, and to provide you with an overview of the community plan area and explain what areas are eligible for selection as a site for a retail cannabis outlet and which areas are not, and to answer any questions that you have. On the subject of questions, you're going to have an ample opportunity in a variety of different ways to ask questions of all of the staff that are here tonight. I'm joined by Stephen Yee from the Assistant County Executive Office. He's in charge of business licensing, and Catherine Lair from the Planning and Development Department. In addition to what tonight is and what tonight is about, I'd also like to touch briefly on what tonight is not. It is not the time when we are going to select a specific site, and nor is it the time when we are going to select a specific vendor. It is also not your last opportunity to weigh in, to ask questions, and to make your opinion and your viewpoint known. Besides tonight, when this is over, this meeting is recorded. You will have an opportunity. You can see at the bottom of your screen the particular website. There are 3 additional community plan area meetings being held, one tomorrow night, and then one next Wednesday and next Thursday. There's ample opportunity. You'll be given contact information, email information, telephone information, all kinds of opportunities to weigh in with us. We received a number of comments and questions in anticipation of tonight's meeting. All of those are captured and made part of the record. And this entire process about the retail outlet selection process will be going back to the Board of Supervisors on August the 18th. So that you'll have plenty of opportunity to weigh in, and we care very much about your thoughts and your opinions about where to best put this particular site, this particular activity. And I'd like to pause for a minute now, if I could, and introduce 1st District Supervisor Das Williams.
Hi, Barney. Hi, folks. I'm pleased that so many have chosen to participate through this and through email and through this process. This location and the siting of retail is something that we really felt as the board that we wanted to reflect more than anything else the particular community benefit that a particular community values and is in need of. I have gotten close to many of you through the trials and travails of fire, flood, leaking oil wells, and other things. And there is definitely particular benefits that Summerland is in need of, and I encourage folks, regardless about their feelings about marijuana and about larger, to focus a lot on what is the community benefit bar. And I would even encourage even people who are diametrically opposed to marijuana to, if you were smart, you just set the bar really high or too high to reach, because our criteria and our system is very much focused on what is the value that the community puts on a particular community benefit that they could see from the advent of a retail cannabis in the community. I'll be listening and listening to the public comments that are at the end of this and the presentation. So we'll go through this process like we have so many other trials and travails. We'll go through this process together.
Thank you, Supervisor Williams. And just a note before we get started, if you look at, for those of you that are on Zoom, if you look at the bottom of your screen, you'll see a Q&A button. If you select that, you can ask questions as we're going along. We may try to answer them in the sort of the natural flow of the presentation, but we will definitely answer them at the end of the presentation before before we say goodnight to everyone. So with that, again, thank you for being here. And now I would like to introduce you to Stephen Yee, who will walk us through the business licensing application process. Stephen.
Thank you, Mr. Malakian. Good evening, residents of Santa Barbara County. As Barney mentioned, my name is Stephen Yee, and I'm a fiscal and policy analyst representing the county's executive office. I also serve as the coordinator of the cannabis program's business licensing function. The objectives of my presentation today are twofold. One, provide an overview of the county's merit-based cannabis retail storefront selection process. And two, to detail the county's cannabis business license application submittal requirements and associated review process. The county's merit-based retail storefront selection process commences with an application that requires the following: an application deposit fee, all requirements as stated in the Business License Ordinance, Chapter 50, except for live scans, a seller's permit, and an issued land use entitlement. A business operations proposal is required, and so is the neighborhood compatibility plan. Upon submittal of the application package, staff will perform the following initial reviews. The county executive office will review the application package and perform a review for overall completeness. And the planning and development department will perform a review to ensure that the proposed operation location is properly zoned. If any portion of the application is incomplete or the proposed location is not properly zoned, a notice of non-acceptance will be issued to the applicant, and the application will not move forward for further processing. If the application is deemed complete and the location is properly zoned, the application moves on to the next phase of review and scoring. This second phase consists of a review of the Chapter 50 requirements. This review is conducted by the business licensing team, and the resulting scores are assigned a 25% weighting factor. The second component of this phase is a review of the business operations proposal conducted by a third-party evaluator and is assigned a 75% weighting factor. Aggregate scores of 85% or higher move on to the next phase of review and scoring. Those applicants achieving a score of less than 85% are noticed and will not move forward in the selection process. Phase 3 of the selection process consists of review, scoring, and force ranking of applications by community plan area. This will be conducted by an internal selection committee on the following two components: the Chapter 50 requirements weighted at 10%, and the neighborhood compatibility plan weighted at 90%. Applicants achieving the highest score in each community plan area will be allowed the opportunity to apply for a land use entitlement and must also submit a complete cannabis business license application. Next, I'd like to detail the cannabis business license application submittal and review processes so that the public has a thorough understanding of the rigorous requirements and review process that our board has adopted. At a high level, cannabis business licensing allows for an inquiry into the fitness of the proposed entity and all individuals associated with the business, including owners, managers, supervisors, and employees. A business license is required for any person or entity who intends to engage in a commercial cannabis operation in the county. A business license must be obtained prior to commencement of business. However, an exception has been made for those legal non-conforming cultivators who are operating under the state's medicinal laws prior to January of 2016. Further, any person or entity seeking or possessing a cannabis state license must obtain the corresponding county business license. Cannabis business licenses, once issued, are valid for a term of 1 year. A final, unappealable, approved, and issued land use entitlement is required prior to issuance of a business license. For any changes in ownership greater than 10%, a new business license application must be submitted. Finally, cannabis business licenses, once issued, are non-transferable. Per the Cannabis Business License Ordinance, a cannabis business licensing team has been assembled and consists of county departments and one outside agency that have been assigned review responsibilities relating to the review of submitted license applications. The departments that make up the licensing team are as follows: the Agricultural Commissioner's Office, County Executive Office, County Fire, the Carpinteria Summerland Fire District, Environmental Health Services, which is a division of the Public Health Department, Planning and Development Department, the Sheriff's Department, the Sustainability Division, which falls under the Community Services Department, and the Treasurer Tax Collector. The application content that operators are required to submit and that which our licensing team reviews is as follows: background and contact information, which includes all applicant and agent names and contact info, the name and contact info for all business owners, managers, supervisors, employees, and persons having a 10% or more financial interest in the entity, a 24-hour contact name and phone number in case of any complaints that need addressing, government issued ID for all owners, managers, supervisors, and employees to verify that all individuals meet the appropriate age requirements, and the entity name, address, and license numbers for all other commercial cannabis operations currently being operated or previously operated by the applicant. We also gathered the following information on the operation: a full description of the proposed activities and products, proposed hours of operations, the total number of employees, physical address and assessor's parcel number, a property and premise diagram, and evidence of the authority to operate, which consists of either proof of ownership of the premises, or, if rented or leased, written permission from the property owner authorizing the tenant or lessee to conduct commercial cannabis activities at the site. And this authorization must be notarized. Additionally, applicants must provide the following state information: copies of the applicant's state licenses or applications, quantity and type of state licenses that will be required for the proposed operation, state seller's permit or evidence that the applicant is applying for one, and as mentioned previously, an issued land use entitlement is also required. As for business entity requirements, the applicant must provide the name and contact information for the business entity, the entity's legal status, and proof of registration with the California Secretary of State. Applicants are also required to submit other supporting documentation, such as a quality control plan. This plan must address procedures on how the applicant will comply with state standards for non-contamination. Additionally, applicants must also submit an inventory control plan to demonstrate the ability to track the location of all cannabis product and be able to reconcile inventories with the records in the track and trace database, which all operators must comply with. There are also requirements that must be met regarding site security plans and background checks. The site security plan elements that applicants must address are as follows: a perimeter security system, including fencing, locks, and alarms, motion activated perimeter exterior lighting, an alarm system maintained by a licensed company with central monitoring capabilities, and a video security system with 24-hour monitoring. Applicants must also identify limited access areas and associated protocols, as well as an employee training plan. And applicants must identify professional security personnel, which is a requirement for all retail storefront licenses. Criminal background checks are required for any individual associated with a cannabis operation. All owners, managers, and supervisors are required to go through a live scan background check conducted by our sheriff's office that discloses no felony convictions. For employees, it is incumbent upon the business entity to perform background checks on all employees and to retain those results. For any individual that successfully passes the background check, the sheriff's office then provides an ID card that must be worn at all times when on site at the cannabis operation location. Again, per the business license ordinance, each department or agency of the licensing team is assigned specific review responsibilities for a given application. Generally, the licensing team reviews the license application and supporting documentation. They also visit the operation location to conduct site inspections. Once each department or agency approves of their portion of the license review process, the county executive office may provide recommendation of license issuance to the treasurer tax collector's office. The treasurer tax collector then performs a review of the applicant's cannabis tax status, and if no delinquencies exist, may produce and issue the license. Again, once a license is issued, it is valid for 1 year. Per the business license ordinance, a licensed operator must submit a renewal application annually. The review of a renewal license application consists of the following reviews by the licensing team: a review of odor complaints and responses to those complaints in compliance with the county's zoning ordinance, review of the renewal application and supporting documentation, and lastly, site inspections. In addition to the annual renewal requirement and the associated review process, the licensing team performs ongoing compliance checks throughout the term of the license to ensure compliance with the business licensing ordinance. The licensing team has established compliance check schedules to perform these mid-year visits. And finally, per the business license ordinance, county officials and staff may inspect the cannabis operations records, books, accounts, financial data, and any and all data relevant to its licensed activities for the purpose of conducting an audit or examination. And with that, I'll turn the presentation back over to Mr. Malekian.
Thanks, Stephen, for that thorough and complete presentation. As folks should be able to see, this process for the people who apply is going to be thorough and exhaustive. And I think you'll discover will address a lot of community concerns. We're now going to turn to the permitting and land use portion of this presentation. I'd like to turn it over to Catherine Lair from Planning and Development. Ms. Lair.
Thank you. Hello, my name is Catherine Lair. I'm a supervising planner in the cannabis section of the county's Planning and Development Department. As Mr. Yee noted, any future cannabis storefront retailers will need to obtain a land use entitlement through the Planning and Development Department. The next few slides will provide an overview on the permit process for potential cannabis retail businesses, where these retail businesses can potentially be located, and what happens after an applicant obtains a permit through the Planning Department. The county code defines cannabis storefront retail as the retail site or sale, and delivery of cannabis or cannabis products to customers, and I'll be referring to this as storefront retailers. A cannabis storefront retailer is required to operate from a licensed premise, which as a physical location from which the commercial cannabis activities are conducted. A retailer's premise may be closed to the public, and they may also be able to conduct some sales by delivery. So next slide, please. Land use permitting is regulated by 3 separate ordinances for the inland, coastal, and Montecito areas of the county. Any future cannabis retail business applications would be analyzed and processed through one of these ordinances. Storefront retailers located in the inland area are allowed in most commercial zone districts with the approval of a land use permit. Similarly, in certain mixed-use zone districts throughout the county, cannabis storefront retailers are allowed with a conditional use permit. I'll provide a more detailed overview of the land use and conditional use permit processes in the next slide. Storefront retailers located in the coastal zone of the county require a coastal development permit and are only allowed in certain commercial zone districts. Finally, the Montecito Land Use and Development Code does not allow for cannabis storefront retailers to be located within the area due to the zoning. Although cannabis storefront retailers can be permitted in all of the aforementioned zone districts, there are other locational criteria that may limit the location of a storefront retail business. For example, cannabis storefront retailers may not be located within 750 feet from schools providing instruction in kindergarten or any grade 1 through 12, daycare centers, or youth centers. We'll provide a more detailed overview of the Summerland and Toro Canyon community plan areas and highlight the zone districts that could potentially allow for storefront retailers in future slides. As previously mentioned, any future cannabis retail business will need to obtain a land use permit, coastal development permit, or a conditional use permit from planning and development. We'll now provide an overview of the land use and coastal development permit processes. An applicant is first required to meet the applicable requirements, under the business license review process, after which they can submit a land use application to planning and development. Staff then reviews the project for conformity with all applicable zone district requirements, such as setbacks and parking, as well as for cannabis specific development standards. Certain applications will need to be reviewed by other county agencies, such as the fire department, environmental health services, and even potentially some external agencies such as Caltrans. Once an application is deemed complete and all of the analysis is completed, the project is then ready for a decision, and planning and development will notify all property owners and residents within 1,000 feet of the subject property, as well as any interested parties. This mailed notice also includes information on how to appeal a decision. Once the planning department makes a decision on a project, which can be either the approval or denial of an application, there's a 10-day calendar appeal period for applicants and or members of the public to appeal the department's decision. Generally speaking, for projects requiring a land use or coastal development permit, the department's general goal is to make a decision within 3 to 6 months. The permit process for a conditional use permit is similar to the land use permit process, except that conditional use permits require a public hearing, and the project must meet additional findings that are focused on ensuring neighborhood compatibility with all of the proposed uses. As detailed in the prior slide, staff reviews the applications for conformance with all applicable zone district requirements and cannabis development standards. Staff will obtain all required clearances from other agencies as well. When projects that require conditional use permits are ready for a hearing, staff will send notices to all property owners and residents within 1,000 feet of the subject property, as well as interested parties. Notices for conditional use permits include the date of the public hearing and also include information on how an applicant or a member of the public can file an appeal. For projects that require a conditional use permit, the department's general goal for making a decision on the project is 6 to 9 months. If the planning department approves a project, applicants must still complete several post-approval requirements. For example, applicants will need to comply with all conditions of approval that are placed on their project from all other county departments, and applicants must also obtain any grading or building permits as needed. Additionally, approved cannabis storefront retailers will need to obtain a county business license from the county executive office, as outlined earlier in this presentation by Mr. Yee. So now we'll take a look at the Summerland and Toro Canyon community plan areas. So this map identifies potential sites that cannabis storefront retail operations could be located within Summerland and Toro community plan areas. For those of you familiar with our coast, the Toro Canyon area is located towards the right, and there's a small sliver of green next to the 101 there. And the Summerland location is towards the upper left portion of the slide. Next slide, please. So zooming into these locations, these maps identify potential sites that retailer operations could be located. The green areas of the map are the zone districts that allow cannabis storefront retail. These include commercial zone districts, C1 and C2, as described earlier in the presentation. If we go to the next slide, we have a more detailed view here. It's really important to note that these areas only show the zone districts where future cannabis retail businesses could potentially be located. However, as we previously described, any future businesses need to go through the appropriate county permitting processes before they're allowed to operate. If we zoom in for one more slide there, the areas shown in blue are sensitive receptors and are schools, daycare centers, or youth centers, and they're surrounded by a red 750-foot buffer. These buffers show areas where no storefront retail can occur. So, for example, even though the green zones in this area could potentially allow these businesses based on the zoning, because of this sensitive receptor buffer area, they could not obtain permits or operate in these areas. Next slide, please. This slide shows Santa Claus Lane in the Toro Canyon Community Plan. As noted on the screen, the green areas are zone districts that would allow for cannabis storefront retailers. To this date, we have not identified any sensitive receptors in this area. Therefore, you'll see no blue outlines or red buffers. Finally, additional information and map resources can be found at the county's cannabis webpage located at cannabis.countyofsb.org. Specifically, we want to point you in the direction of our interactive cannabis mapping program, where you can explore a more interactive version of the maps described before. So I'm going to take a hold of the screen here. Thank you. So this is the cannabis.countyofsb.org webpage. The latest news is tonight's community engagement meetings. So clicking on this link will take you to an overview of what we're doing here tonight. Scrolling down, we have a number of very helpful links, one of which is our County of Santa Barbara permitting and zoning map. Next to that link, we also have a tip sheet for how to navigate that map. So clicking on the mapping link will bring you to this, our interactive map. On the top right here, there are a variety of symbols. The furthest right is a bookmark. So for ease of use and for these community meetings, we've established these bookmarks to identify the areas that we're discussing. So for tonight, we'll start with Summerland here. Clicking on this bookmark will zoom us into the location that we saw in the previous images. This button here is the layer list. To review what we're reviewing tonight, please make sure you have these specific layers on. There's a 600-foot buffer layer, a 750-foot buffer, and then a link or a layer that depicts parcels that have the appropriate zoning. So zooming in here, we can see that while a lot of these parcels are highlighted in green, they're within our sensitive buffer. Zooming in further and just taking this corner for an example, this parcel is located outside both of those buffers. Clicking on it provides the APN, the site address, and as well provides a Google Map link that you can click for more information. This will bring up Google Maps and give you an aerial view of what we were looking at. Additionally, for those of you that are not familiar or maybe less familiar with Google Maps, if you click on the little Google figure here, you can drag and drop the person down on these highlighted streets, and you can get a street level view of the parcel that you're interested in looking at. Going back to our interactive map, the same goes for the Toro Canyon Community Plan area. Going back to the bookmarks, we click on Santa Claus Lane and Toro Canyon, and we have a similar setup here. The green parcels, the green parcels are zoned appropriately for potential cannabis retailers. Once again, clicking on these parcels brings up some additional information, and you can get a better view of these parcels and what is located on them currently by clicking on that Google link and putting the little Google person down on Santa Claus Lane. So with that, we are available for questions later this evening, and I will turn this back over to you, Mr. Malekian.
Thank you, Catherine. That was very informative. Before these presentations are over, I'm going to figure out how to use the little man, but I haven't gotten there yet. And with that, we're going to go to Q&A. We're going to do this in a particular sequence. There are some questions and comments that are in the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. There are people on Zoom who have indicated that they wish to speak, and there are people that we have made arrangements for them to call in. As I go through, I'm going to start with the questions and comments that are in Q&A, and walk through it. Some of these are just comments. People don't care for a particular location. Their position is that the site should not be located here for a variety of reasons. And I want to assure you that while we're not going to try to address that tonight, all of these comments are going to be recorded. The nature of the comment, the opinion being expressed, and all of those will be part of the report to the Board of Supervisors on the 18th of August. There are several questions related to the Montecito area, and particularly Coast Village Road and the Upper Village. And it says that Supervisor Williams rejected these ideas. I'm going to let Catherine or someone from planning explain about the Montecito Planning Commission, but I can assure you that the supervisor had no role in that, any of those decisions. Catherine?
Thank you, Mr. Malekian. So the Montecito Land Use Ordinance provides different zoning for commercial businesses. To have a storefront retail operation in the coastal zone, it needs to be located in an area that's zoned C1 or C2. In the Montecito area, we don't have C1 or C2 zoning. Therefore, we cannot permit any storefront retailers in that area. More specifically, with regards to Coast Village Road, I believe the majority of, if not all of Coast Village Road is actually outside the county, and we don't have any jurisdiction and would not be able to issue permits for any storefront retailers looking to operate in that area.
Thank you. And if we haven't stressed it, just to piggyback on what Catherine said, this presentation, this ordinance applies to the unincorporated areas of the county. Does not apply to inside any of the incorporated city limits. And it is very specific about a maximum of 1 retail outlet per community plan area. So there will be a maximum of 6 throughout the entire county, and only a maximum of 1 in the Toro Canyon Summerland area. Next question is, please speak to exactly what is community compatibility. That's not a completely easy thing to define, but part of that definition is taking place here tonight. And there's a question later on about what constitutes neighborhood compatibility. As we collect all these comments and questions and look at the information that we receive both at this presentation and elsewhere, and we look at things like parking impacts, traffic flow, neighborhood concerns, other options that are available, all of those things will go into the scoring around neighborhood compatibility or community compatibility. In the end, the top applicant in each community plan area, that will be presented to the board at some subsequent board meeting, not on August the 18th, but further down the road. We'll talk in a minute about the process itself. But it'll be very clear about why the site was chosen and why the neighborhood compatibility score ended up wherever it ended up. And there's no rigid formula for this. We're really trying to take into account all community concerns and the expertise of the planners that work in the planning and development department. There's several comments about Santa Claus Lane and where it should be selected, and again, those will be duly noted. There is a question, and I'm going to look to the planning department, and if we can't answer this question, I will make sure that we get back to everyone. This is, why are the surf schools on Santa Claus Lane not considered sensitive receptors? There are hundreds of children there daily. This thing keeps scrolling during many months of the year. I don't know whether that's a question that planning can address or if we should look to county council.
Thanks, Mr. Mulligan. I'll take a stab at it and we'll see how that goes. So cannabis storefront retailers cannot be located within 750 feet from schools providing instruction in kindergarten or grades 1 through 12, daycare centers, or youth centers. If the surf school is operating on the beach and outside of a parcel, we're gonna look at it slightly differently. Additionally, these maps are representative of the information that we have to date, and they're for informational purposes. As we learn more about potential sensitive receptors, we'll look into each of those individually and update the maps accordingly.
Thank you. In what way is cannabis business licensing different from any other business licensing? I'll let Stephen take a stab at that, but I can tell you that the cannabis business licensing process is much more exhaustive than other business licenses. Stephen?
Thank you, Mr. Malekian. I'm honestly not as familiar with the regular business license process and the requirements therein. However, I am very familiar with the cannabis business license process. And in speaking with multiple applicants, they've asked the question, why is this cannabis business licensing process so rigorous? As I mentioned in my presentation, we've established, actually our board has established a business licensing team. All of those departments and the one outside agency that I mentioned all have review responsibilities per the Cannabis Business License Ordinance. Again, at a high level, the main purpose of the business license, cannabis business license process is to explore the fitness of the proposed operator. We mentioned that there's various background checks. There's various site security requirements, and there's a plethora of other reviews that are performed, both of documentation to ensure consistency between what was approved as part of the land use entitlement, as well as site inspections. Hopefully that answers your question.
Yeah, thank you, and we'll get a little bit further information about some of the distinctions between cannabis and other business licenses, and put that up on the Q&A portion of our website. It says, did I read this correctly that applicants will only have 7 days to complete the application? You did read that correctly. Actually, I think I just skipped one, but I'll come back to it. Will the application be available? Did I read it correctly that applicants only have 7 days to complete it? The answer is yes. However, the ordinance requires that the notice of intent to open the application requires 30 days notice, a minimum of 30 days notice. So the potential vendors, the potential applicants will have more than ample time to prepare. They will have the application form. It simply is a 7-day window when we will accept those applications. Let's see here. Is odor control part of the storefront retail requirement? The answer is yes. Next question is, will Summerland and Toro Canyon be treated as two separate community plan areas regarding the number of license? The answer is no. Summerland Toro Canyon is one community plan area. So within the confines of that community plan area, there is a maximum of one retail outlet. Says, I think you skipped the first part of my question. When will the applications be available? We haven't landed on an exact date yet, partly because a portion of what has to occur at the Board of Supervisors meeting on August 18th is formal approval of both the business licensing score sheet and the neighborhood compatibility score sheet. So depending on what changes may be made to those score sheets at that meeting will determine the timing of the next steps. If a school or daycare or youth center opens nearby within the buffer zone, would a cannabis retail storefront need to close? I don't think so, but I don't know that I know the answer to that. So Catherine, I'm looking to you again to bail me out.
Sure. So if a cannabis retailer gets a permit from the Santa Barbara Planning and Development Department, as well as a business license from the CEO's office, they are an established use. If a school, daycare, or youth center opens after they have obtained all their permits and licenses, that operation would be considered legal non-conforming, but would not need to close.
This is kind of a repeat on the number of licenses. How many will be issued per community plan? The answer is 1. There's a comment that requiring a CDP is much less rigorous than a CUP. That's duly noted. And somebody said, I didn't understand the answer whether Summerland and Toro Canyon are considered one community plan area. The answer is yes. And what is a sensitive receptor? I'll let Catherine, I think she's got the listing in front of her, but it's schools, daycare centers, and the like.
I believe you had that about just right. It's any schools providing instruction in kindergarten, any grade 1 through 12, daycare centers, or youth centers.
Very good. Is 750 feet a fixed sensitive receptor zone or subject to further dialogue? I believe that is part of the ordinance. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Gina to go to some of the people who have been waiting in the Zoom queue. Gina?
Thank you, Barney. And before I do, I just want to give a couple of instructions for anyone who may be new to Zoom and for those who may be using the phone. There are a couple of ways to let us know that you'd like to speak. If you're in through Zoom, either on the computer or using the Zoom app, there is a feature that says raise my hand, and so you can indicate that you wish to speak by using that. If you're using a phone without video, you can use *9 and that will raise your hand and we know to call on you. If you are on a computer that does not have audio or a way to communicate through the computer, you can also call, and there will be time to do this. The toll-free number 833-548-0276. And that way you can keep your video on, but you can also add a phone line and again use *9 to let us know you wish to speak. So of those who we've got a couple of things. I've got 5 people who have asked to speak, had let us know in advance. So I'm going to open it up to those. And just so that you know you're on deck, Anna Carrillo, Mark Brickley, John Heil, Leslie Robinson, and Jose Salazar. And even though we're going to go to Anna Carrillo, Anna had submitted these questions. So I'll go ahead and at least do the first two questions, and then Anna will have her time to speak. So the first question is on slide 7. And Reese, I don't know if we need to go to slide 7. It is stated that the neighborhood compatibility plan is assigned a 90% weighting factor, but in a previous document prepared for the Board of Supervisors in March, incorporating ideas and suggestions from neighborhood priorities would count for 30%, which I think is too low. Community involvement, this is actually more of a comment than a question. Community involvement should account for at least 51%. Some of the areas included, like interior and exterior design plans, should be under bar review. Is there anything that we want to comment on?
Yeah, let me just take there are actually two separate things. There are actually two separate score sheets. There is the business license application sheet, which includes a lot of technical data, and then there's the neighborhood compatibility plan. Within the neighborhood compatibility plan score sheet is community impact and basically community input, and that accounts for 30% of that overall neighborhood compatibility score sheet. When it goes to phase 3 of the second phase, those are the people who made it past the 85% scoring mark in the business application piece. Then they're scored on neighborhood compatibility. That plan then counts for 90% of the final score, and the remaining requirements from the business license application account for 10%. So they're actually two distinct scoring pieces.
Thank you, Barney. And then the second question is, since the coastal development permit is a permanent land permit for a retail cannabis storefront, will that assigned location always be a cannabis retail store regardless of the operator?
Catherine?
Thank you. So if an applicant obtains a land use or coastal development permit to operate a storefront retail business, that business will remain permitted as a cannabis storefront retailer until there is some sort of change of use.
Thank you, Catherine. And so now we will begin with those who have their hands up or requested to speak, beginning with Anna. Your mic is open. Go ahead.
Okay, thank you very much for answering some of my questions already. I live on Toro Canyon. I'm a resident of the Toro Canyon community. And I also have grandchildren who go to school in Summerland, and I'm there twice a day picking up. You've already answered about, or you've made the comment that you're going to look at the coastal development permit because it's such a less bar than having a CUP where there's public input and there's a public meeting beforehand as opposed to the whole appeal period. The problems that I see in Santa Claus is that it's a recreation. It's designed for families. The parking and the traffic there are, terrible. And there's no local enforcement on the beach. And I see the same problem in Summerland. The traffic is unbearable at the two ends. The eastern end has the restaurant and people are just parked all along the street where that would be a possibility, and the same at the far end also. Again, thank you very much.
Thank you, Anna. Is there anything that staff would like to address? Otherwise, we will go to Mark Brickley.
In about a quarter mile.
Sorry, Mark, go ahead.
Sorry, Mark, go ahead and start over.
I'm Mark Brickley, and I live about a mile from Summerland and about a quarter mile from Toro Canyon Road. I've lived in this area for over 25 years. I've appreciated the information that I've received from Supervisor Williams, Mr. Malikian, Mr. Yee, and Planning and Development staff, including Ms. Plowman. I'd like to make 2 brief points and then ask a question. First, the delivery of cannabis is already available to Summerland and Carpinteria residents through Santa Barbara's storefront shops and its dispensaries. Carpinteria has no cannabis storefronts, nor has it ever publicly considered authorizing one. That would require a change to their zoning laws. And secondly, to amplify Ms. Carrillo's question and response, the county's, I believe the cannabis scoring sheet underweighs community input at 30% of that score. And I appreciate Mr. Malikian's explanation, but I think it should be raised and other sections of the scoring sheet can be realistically combined to accomplish that change. My question, the Board of Supervisors has authorized up to 6 cannabis retail storefronts in the unincorporated areas of Santa Barbara County, including Summerland. Is 0 an option? Once the Board of Supervisors receives Summerland's, Toro Canyon's community input, will they be willing to step back and not impose a retail cannabis store in Summerland? Thank you.
Thank you, Mark. I don't think anybody, the ordinance on that is open to interpretation. It does refer to a maximum of 1 outlet per community plan area, which would suggest that certainly 0 is an option. But I think that would really be based on the quality of the applications that we receive, the input from the neighborhood and the community, and ultimately it would be a board decision.
Thank you, Barney. Next up, we are going to John Heil. And John, if you could unmute. There you go. Your mic is open.
Okay, thank you. My name is John Heil, and I am the chair of the recently defined Summerland Cannabis Committee under the auspices of the Summerland Citizens Association. We are in the process of creating an objective assessment and then very accurately acquiring the actual sentiments of the Summerland community, both the business communities and the residential communities. This will be done over the next 2 weeks, be completed and available toward the end of the month. And I think it's going to give a very accurate assessment, which I can't speak to now, but of Summerland community's feelings. We've had a problem in the past of leaving it to a few activists to speak for the community. This will involve 100% of the business community and their feelings toward it, in favor or in opposition, plus reasons why, as well as a very high level of residential support as well. So we're excited about it. I think it's been done in this committee form in a very unbiased and completely objective manner. So we'll get a nonpartisan feedback and a lot of good statistical relevance that we can project, and look forward to sharing that. My question in advance of that is, as we approach August 18th, the decision date, and where we're here talking about a community area that is exclusively in Doss Williams area, who makes the final decision? Is that the determination of Doss? Is that the determination of the 5 board members and the supervisors? And I'd love to understand how that decision will be made, because the other 4, I don't have a plan yet to talk to them about the results in advance of that time, and I'd like to understand the process better.
So thank you, John, for the question. And for clarification, August 18th is not decision day in the sense of picking a site or selecting an applicant. August 18th is a presentation to the board on the following things: the proposed timeline for opening the opening the retail application process, and for gaining approval of each of the score sheets. So several people tonight have made suggestions about how those score sheets might be weighted differently, et cetera. Once we have obtained approval of the score sheet in whatever form, and if it's changed, there's a very good possibility that we would have to come back to the board briefly for some minor sort of technical adjustments. And only once all that process was finalized could we open the application process. I take it all the way out to the other end, where we have the 30 days notice that the application is open. We have the 7 days that it actually is open. And then we go through the scoring and weighting process. And then at some point it will come back to the board. It is ultimately the board in its entirety that would approve the recommendation of staff. Staff's recommendation would be to award a retail license or a retail, the opportunity actually, to complete a business license process and land use process for retail operator for applicant X. And it's the board either approves that, or if there's some concern that gets raised, either legal or some other fashion, that they could conceivably direct staff to come back and do something else. But I do want to emphasize that the board is not involved in the formal selection of applications. They are only reviewing and approving or disapproving recommendations of staff. I hope that provides some clarity.
Thank you, Barney. Next up, we're going to Leslie Robinson.
Can I ask a follow-up question to that?
Sure.
Yeah, thank you very much, Barney. Since the board won't be directly involved, but will be handed that scorecard, how do we ensure that this consumer-based, resident-based feedback gets into the scorecard preparation? How do I speak to the right people so that they accurately assess community input?
Are you talking about the survey you referenced?
Yes, I am.
That would very simply submit it to the clerk of the board as feedback or as input to the item on August the 18th, and any subsequent meetings where the topic comes up.
Sorry, John, did you have more?
I suppose the only question with that, I suppose the only question I have with that is, if we go back to what we said earlier, when we move into the consideration of the community's compatibility, the neighborhood compatibility of 90%, what percent of that 90% is a reflection not of parking and traffic, but of the actual sentiment of the community?
I don't think there's I shouldn't say I don't think, because I know there's not a formal allocation of that. The group that's appointed, the department head, the third party reviewer, the CEO's office, and the planning department, all of us apply our best judgment to the totality of the information that we have at hand. And just for clarification, because I understand the reason for the confusion. It is the neighborhood compatibility score sheet in its entirety, and actually, I think you can find it on the draft on the website, and if not, make sure that we get it up there. I don't know if we have it up there yet because it hasn't been approved, but it's the community input is 30% of that, but the neighborhood compatibility overall is 90% of the phase 2 score. So that's that distinction. Thanks, John.
Okay.
Now we are going to Leslie Robinson.
Hi, thank you. This is Leslie Robinson. I live in Summerland. Most of my questions have been answered. Thank you very much. And at this point, I would like to thank you, the staff and DOS, for holding these presentations to engage the community so that we do have an opportunity to speak on this issue. Sometimes we're ignored because we're small in Summerland and don't carry a lot of votes, but we do feel that we have a special community and that we have a vision for this community that is a very family-friendly, rural and urban seaside community, which we would like to retain. So that's just a comment on my part. And I also want to say that I'm really grateful that the Summerland citizens got together and organized themselves so they can do a survey and get the input that you will need to hear about the neighborhood compatibility from the citizens' point of view. So I think it will be an objective survey, and I hope that you will really give it the strength and weight that it will require on this issue. So other than that, I just want to say thank you for letting us have input at this meeting.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Leslie. Now I don't see Jose Salazar in the list, so we've got 3 in the queue: Liz R., Elizabeth, and then Renee O'Neill. So Liz?
Thank you
There
so
you go.
much. Can you hear me okay?
We can hear you fine.
Thank you very much. Sorry, I'm
Mhm.
just gonna pull up my note really quick. I wanted to ask because I saw that it was recently reported in the Santa Maria Times that the cannabis taxes have helped cover the county's $24.4 million budget deficit. And as today, the news reported that there's been a record-breaking day of new corona cases, COVID cases in California. I wanted to know if there's will there be a certain amount of cannabis taxes from these dispensaries that are dedicated to the community that has the dispensary, like a certain amount of dedicated tax money? So, because if the community is, has this dispensary and they obviously want to have their input, it would be great if, there was a portion of that was going directly to the community. And also I wondered if social equity is being considered as an additional criteria in the selection process. Thank you very much.
So the second part of your question is easy to answer about social equity. Is it being considered? The answer is absolutely yes. County is well aware of both the state and national discussion about cannabis retail as an entrepreneurial on-ramp into economic equity. With regards to the question about allocation of funds, that's really a board and finance decision that's not written into the ordinance. But generally, I do have to correct one thing. I didn't see the Santa Maria article you referenced, but I can assure you that the cannabis tax revenue is not covering the projected deficit. It's certainly being used to cover a portion of it, but not the entirety of it. I don't think any decision has been made about, or there's been really no discussion about specific allocation of funds to community plan areas.
Thank you, Barney. Next, we're going to Elizabeth. Go ahead. Elizabeth, there's a problem with your audio. We can't understand your audio. Let's do this. No, it sounds like a video or audio track on fast speed. Let's try this. Can you use the Q&A window to let it? We honestly cannot understand. I'll come back to you. We're going to go to the next caller and see if maybe there's something with your microphone. Renee O'Neill.
Thank you. Oh, I'm talking into my cell phone. Can you hear me?
Perfectly.
Okay. Thank you so much, Gina. First, I want to commend you guys. I am so impressed with everything you are doing. and really appreciate the efforts you're putting into this. I have a question. Many communities in our county have community plans, including Toro Canyon. As I understand it, one of their top goals is to preserve the existing rural and semi-rural qualities of the community. How do cannabis retail shops align with a plan like that? It seems to be completely contradictory. The other thing I wanted to mention, if I have a minute, is I know this, I believe the state has a 1,000-foot buffer for sensitive receptors. Santa Barbara County has a much smaller buffer, 750 feet in regard to retail. I would like to know who came up with those ordinances and if maybe that falls under the same auspicions as what the ad hoc committee did with developing regulations in our county, and if maybe similar things were done in developing state regulations, because I live a half a mile from a cannabis farm and I can tell you I can smell it from here. So the 1,000-foot buffer or a 750-foot buffer from a retail store, I can throw a rock that far. It just doesn't make sense. It doesn't make sense to have retail stores in communities where you're trying to preserve the existing rural, semi-rural quality of that community. Thank you for listening.
Thank you, Renee.
Thanks, Renee. And I think most of that qualifies as a comment, and we'll certainly take it under consideration. I don't know whether planning wants to lay out the distinctions between the federal, state, and our county buffers. But the county, my understanding is that the county is entitled to draw its buffer line where it will, but maybe somebody from planning has a better answer. With regards to the nature of the store, from a legal perspective and from a business perspective, a cannabis retail outlet is definitely not a cannabis cultivation site in terms of odor and in terms of what happens. And the odor, somebody asked earlier, is odor control part of that? And the answer is that it is. And there are, I think, 3 stores in the city of Santa Barbara. And for the most part, you could drive right by them and not know they were there. But all of that kind of thing, the suitability, the general character of the neighborhood, wherever the proposal is, all of that is going to be taken into consideration. I just wanted to sort of make that distinction. And Catherine or someone else from planning, I don't know whether you want to weigh in on where the buffer limits came from. And if not, we can try to get an answer at a later time.
Thank you, Mr. Malikian. So the 1,000-foot buffer, I believe that's mentioned, those are related to federal laws for possession of other regulated drugs and distribution. The board adopted an ordinance that says 750 feet buffers for sensitive receptors. So that is what we're going with. This, of course, does not preclude the applicant from compliance with other state and federal laws as applicable.
Thank you, Catherine. I'm going to go back and address Elizabeth. You still have an audio issue. We could hear it when you unmuted yourself. So I've muted you, but here's what I'd like to offer. Can you please call in by phone to 833-548-0276. You can still be watching from your computer. I will see your phone number come in, and if you could hit *9, you'll be able to let us know you'd like to speak. I apologize, but there is a problem with your audio. So I'm going to move on to Gordon Morrison.
Hi, I'm also a resident in Summerland, and I just wanted to ask a question about the evaluation process. I'm new to a lot of this sort of thing, and I thought you could help me out. With regards to the evaluation, where I understand, 90% of it in the second phase is whether or not it fits the community appropriately, and perhaps the community would have a lot of input there. How's the process of evaluating that? How's that done? What is used to ensure that is objectively evaluated as was intended by the community? And then secondly, once a recommendation is made by planners on this, is that sort of somewhat binding, or can it be overruled, or can, would it be possible or conceivable that something else would be done anyway?
So with regards to the specific process, we are in the process of contracting with a third-party vendor who does these kind of evaluations really all over the United States. That contract isn't finalized yet, but we're working on it. And senior staff from the CEO's office, the planning department, and this third party vendor will review and score the applications. And as I mentioned earlier, ultimately take using a forced ranking system, but take one applicant, the top scored applicant from each community plan area, back to the board and report. The board, based on input, based on whatever they wanted to do, I'm trying to be careful because I'm not 100% sure what county council's view on this is if the board were to decide that they had concerns about a particular operator. So I think I'd like to wait if we could. We're a long way from that point in the process yet. We need to get these score sheets finalized on August the 18th and some dates, enter into that contract with a third-party vendor and get the dates up when the application will open and when it will close. But I can assure you that before we ever get anywhere close to that part of the process, I will have an answer for you. And if it hasn't been sort of answered through general discussion, please reach out to me or to anybody on the team, and we'll have an answer for it. I just don't have one definitive one tonight.
Thank you, Barney. In addition, I'll just add that we are capturing all the Q&A and the responses from each meeting and merging and correcting and editing for spelling, formatting, etc. So we will have an entire FAQ that will be added to the website. So more on that, and we also will be following up with everyone after this. So there will be lots of opportunities. Next, we're going to Ken Cohen. You should be able to unmute.
Gotcha. Can you hear me?
We can.
Good, good. I would like to go back to the intention of the 750-foot sensitive receptor zone, and as it pertains to schools. And my question is, if the school is, say, within 800 feet or 850 feet of that, is it open to further dialogue, or is this a fixed number? And if it is a fixed number, where did that 750 feet come from? So, so anyway, that's the question.
And this question has come up, I think, at every meeting. And I looked at planning about where it came from. It came from a board action, but I don't know the exact date. But I can tell you that from a legal technical perspective, if it's outside the 750-foot barrier, it would be, the site would be eligible for consideration. if it was that close to a sensitive receptor, if it was that close to the buffer line, that would certainly be a factor for consideration in making a final decision.
Thank you, Barney. Now we're going to Steve and Nancy. You should be able to unmute.
Yes, hello. Thank you for the presentation here. I'm the property owner on Santa Claus Lane that houses a number of different retail businesses, including Rincon Beach Club, Garden Market, Dario's, several others. So I definitely have a vested interest in the direction of this process. I'd like to start with a question. What's the rationale for a sensitive receptor buffer around schools, daycares, and youth centers? I mean, why, for a cannabis store in particular, how does the operations of a cannabis store differ from other stores that don't have a requirement for a sensitive receptor? Because I think that's really important for all of us to understand.
Well, I don't think it's any secret that the legalization of cannabis and the introduction of cannabis into the mainstream of society is not without controversy. And there has been a great deal of input on people who want the cannabis industry to be wide open, and from equal amount with equal intensity from people who don't want it to be here at all. And so a lot of these things are really a reflection of an attempt to find a compromise between competing interests. Was not privy to the discussions or the board deliberation that produced the 750-foot buffer. But I have to say, in my discussions with people in the cannabis industry, I have not heard a lot of suggestion that distance is unreasonable.
Okay, I guess what my question is, what's the rationale? I mean, obviously, cannabis stores are being treated differently than others in terms of requiring this restriction from children. And so I guess I would say that separate from a school designation or youth center designation or zoning specific parcel description, the fact that on Santa Claus Lane, both at the beach and in the retail area, there's more kids that are just hanging out pretty much any day during the summer months than you would see at any school in the county for a school day. So if there's something intrinsic about the cannabis store that would make us want to circle a buffer zone, then I think it's not related to a parcel number or a zoning designation. It's about the storefront being located where there's children of that age group.
So I'll take that comment, and we will include that in the record in terms of people having expressed their concerns.
If I can end with one last comment, to be honest, it makes me nervous because I have a lot of feeling and emotion about the welfare of Santa Claus Lane and the future of that area. It concerns me that there's been a dictate that there has to be a store, unless there's none, in Summerland or a small portion of Santa Claus Lane. That seems really restricted, especially since most of Summerland is in that buffer zone. So, and to be honest, Summerland has a larger population as way more business people, as way more residents of that community. And to be honest, they're more organized, as we heard the other speaker today. I just hope that it doesn't get kicked down the street to Santa Claus Lane because we don't have the resources or the ability to give a strong voice like some other alternatives may have.
Thank you, Steve. So Barney, there are no more hands up on Zoom, but we have several more questions that have come in.
Okay. When it's stage 2, neighborhood compatibility accounts for 90%. Does that mean that the majority of residents do not want cannabis? Does that mean that 90% that the application fails? No, not in and of itself. The totality of the scoring and the comments and everything else, as I've explained a couple of times, go into the factor of who we select. So in and of itself, there is no, the only sort of pass-fail per se is that in the first stage, the business license phase, you have to get 85% or better. There's a couple of comments in favor and a comment opposed to putting that on Santa Claus Lane. Question about when Montecito changes zoning regulations. I think we touched on that already. A comment that 30% is insufficient, and that'll certainly be noted. Please explain the measuring between property line and premise versus property line to property line. Catherine can answer that. I mean, I think the question is self-explanatory. I think maybe the question is really about how did we arrive at that? You're on mute, Catherine. You're on mute. Oh, there you go.
So the property line is the property line of the parcel, and the premise is the state license area where any of the cannabis related operations can occur. So for example, if a storefront retailer is working or operating out of a business area that's located along a strip of businesses, instead of looking at the entire parcel of or the entire parcel boundary, they will be looking solely at that premise where that operation is occurring. So that one storefront and the distance between that storefront and the property line of the sensitive receptor. This was some amendments, or this was part of the cannabis ordinance that was adopted by the board.
Thank you. And then there's a comment about not wanting cannabis storefronts to be driven underground by refusing legal storefronts. And with that, Gina, I think we have, unless there's some more hands raised, which I can't see, I think we've touched on everything.
Yeah, we do have another hand raised.
Yeah.
And I just want to make sure, scrolling, I'm showing 5 open written questions, maybe because some of them are either clarifications or...
They're all comments.
Okay, so I'm going back to Gordon Morrison again.
I'm sorry, that was a bump. I don't need to ask another question. I think that's left over from before.
I think we've touched on all of these, Gina.
Okay, with that, I see no other hands raised. And so once again, we will be capturing all of this as an FAQ that will be added to the website, plus a video of this meeting will be posted at the same website. Reese, can you go ahead and put up, I think it's the next. Yes, so this website address is where we're posting everything. You can view the meeting later should be up and posted by tomorrow. And part of the reason why we do like to answer these written questions live is so that those watching the video later do have the benefit of hearing the question and the responses. And of course, you can continue to submit comments and questions. And I think I'm going to turn this over to Barney and let him close out the meeting and leave you with these messages.
Thank you, Gina, and thank you, Stephen and Catherine, both of you for such thorough presentations. I just want to stress to everybody that's watched, first of all, thank you for taking time out of your busy day and your busy evening to attend this. And I just want to assure you of the county's commitment to listen to all the viewpoints on this issue and to work very closely with the community. Several of you I have met since I came into this role, and I suspect that we will be talking again more. What you have in front of you are different ways that you can continue to provide input and ask questions. Just again, I want to say good night and thank you and be safe, and we will talk soon. And here's our contact information for different people in the licensing and permitting sides of the house. Take care, everyone, and good night.